Well, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Welcome to the Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. This is our second season.
Amazing.
We have an amazing episode to start the second season off, talking about humor.
It's going to be a lot of fun.
Yes, we hope so.
I think
that
so.
sets a high standard when you actually say we're talking about humor.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. First, though, we want to thank everyone who has left reviews for us to the first season, like this one from Jordan, who said it was unique, informative, and inspirational. This podcast is memorable because it brings together a group of people to talk about a meaningful topic in a panel style, which is new for the podcast world, with wide-ranging yet worthwhile and intense subjects. The hosts do a great job of balancing personal stories and research to reveal key insights. So we appreciate that, Jordan, and wish you the best on all your endeavors as well.
Yeah. Well, when I started thinking about this episode and the power of humor, I could not get that Sherman Brothers song from Mary Poppins out of my head. I love to laugh loud and long and clear. Did you hear the one about the women who laugh and how they actually live longer?
No.
Well, did you hear the one about the men who find things humorous, they can fight off infections more easily?
No.
Well, it's actually not a joke. It's true. These are statistics from a Norwegian study back in 2016.
And if those things are true, then why aren't more people laughing?
I haven't got a clue.
We could start a health trend.
There you go.
We live in an odd time for humor. I mean, what one person finds funny, another person finds silly. What one person finds funny, another person finds offensive.
Mm-hmm. And laughter is powerful, but what makes good comedy? And in a recent article in the Scientific American, they shared a hypothesis about humor. So here's their idea. People laugh when a person simultaneously recognizes both that a norm has been breached and the breach is benign.
So something has to be ridiculous, but not harmful.
Yep.
I know what makes me laugh.
Mm-hmm.
But that might not be the same for other people. What other people find ridiculous and not harmful is different.
Yeah. And, at the beginning of our first season, we said that our podcast looked at macro trends, which we still do, and all things literary, which we still do, with a splash of humor.
Which we don't do.
Well, we thought we were funny. And I have to admit, I have a lot to learn about being humorous. So we have brought experts in to help us get a better grasp about jokes, comedy, and mirth.
Hi, I'm Holland Webb.
Hi, I'm Amy Boland.
And you're listening to The Afterword, a conversation about the future of words. James Cary joins us from the United Kingdom. He is a sitcom writer for the BBC TV, including shows such as Miranda, and a writer for radio, including shows such as Think the Unthinkable. James is also the author of The Sacred Art of Joking, about how jokes work and how they go wrong, especially in the realm of religion. James is a member of the General Synod of the Church of England, is married with 2 children, and lives in Somerset. Welcome, James. What are you doing now? What are you working on?
I've just finished touring a show about the murder of Thomas Becket, because that's hilarious, right? I don't know if you've either read or seen Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot, but if you've ever seen that or read that and just thought, you know what this show needs? It needs jokes and funny songs. Well, that's kind of what I've just done. And I'm currently working on another series of there's a comedian called Milton Jones. It's a radio show for BBC Radio 4. And this is like the 10th series I've written with Milton. So we're recording more episodes of that, which will go out later on this year. And also doing a ton of podcasts and stuff as well. That doesn't pay the bills, working for the BBC and doing that.
Yeah, we haven't found that to be true either, huh?
Not so much. Yeah.
That's
so
awesome.
That's me.
Wonderful.
Thanks for having me, by the way.
Well, we're so excited that you're here. And joining us in studio is Harrison Brookie. He is the founder and executive director of the Alchemy Comedy Theater in Greenville, South Carolina. He's been performing improv and sketch comedy since 2004. He's also a high school social studies teacher with over a decade of classroom teaching experience. In Greenville, he has grown the improv comedy community through Alchemy's year-long training program and annual events like the 30-hour Greenville Comedy Marathon and the New South Comedy Festival. And so that makes you very busy.
That's right.
Yeah. So Harrison, what are you working on right now?
Well, we just finished, you mentioned the New South Comedy Festival. We just finished that. It wrapped up on Saturday.
Wow.
So it was 10 days long, 24 shows, about a dozen comedy workshops, from writing to podcasting to predominantly improv comedy, as much of what we do there at the theater. We just finished that up. And so I slept for 3 days and then went back to teaching.
Man. I wonder, since you talk, I'm just going to bring in just one thing. Do you bring some of your comedy into your teaching?
Oh, sure. Yeah. So I mostly for the last 10 years, I've taught United States history. And so the idea of storytelling and narrative and comedy are throughout
Yeah.
United States history. So it's a
Absolutely.
huge part of it. Sure.
Wonderful. Wonderful.
Yeah, I was just thinking about, as you were talking about that, we did an episode a couple months ago now about performance-led teaching and in using drama as a means of teaching. I didn't think about it at the time, using comedy.
And even just the idea of performance. I mean, I perform multiple times a week. And so the idea of getting students ready for public speaking, and I do that through my U.S. history or current events or government economics classes, getting people on their feet is hugely advantageous for life and the subject matter itself.
Oh, that's awesome. I love that.
All right, James, what makes you laugh?
Loads of things make me laugh. I just love laughing. I know that sounds kind of crazy, but there is especially at the moment, there is quite a penchant for comedy that isn't actually funny. As in, they're not even trying to be funny. Do you know what I mean? The really kind of subtle stuff. Whereas I'm just happy to switch on Brooklyn Nine-Nine and just laugh like a maniac. It's really, it's kind of goofy and funny. Obviously, I love the great classic sitcoms. The ones that you guys have, like Cheers and MASH in the old days. We were so hooked on Cheers in the 80s in the UK that, in the days when houses only had one TV, our TV broke and it went off to be repaired. And my mum was so determined not to miss an episode of Cheers, she just went out and bought another TV.
Wow.
So we became a 2 TV household when the other one got repaired, and it's purely because of Cheers. So I was brought up on watching Cheers and MASH and stuff like that, which we got over here, as well as our own comedies, obviously, which we then exported over to you guys and became shows like All in the Family is a British show, originally called Till Death Us Do Part, and Archie Bunker was originally called Alf Garnett. So yeah, I've always just grown up loving comedy. That's why, and I only realized recently, a year or two ago, that the reason I'm a writer is because I love comedy. I don't love writing. I love writing jokes and I love hearing jokes. And if you want to understand how comedy works, you're gonna end up getting into the engine room, but you're gonna end up writing it. So that's kind of what I've always been into. I just like all the comedies that everyone else likes, and I really admire them. And I just think, well, how can I do that? Frasier, obviously another more recent example. And at the moment, yeah, I'm a sucker for the Goldbergs as well. Actually, I think Beverly Goldberg is one of the great all-time comedy creations. Who's not even a creation. I mean, she's real. She exists in real life, which is kind of terrifying, really. But yeah, sitcoms particularly. I love stand-up too, and I remember watching some amazing stand-up. And growing up, there was a moment hearing Eddie Izzard for the first time. It was just like, wow, comedy can be like that. And he sort of sparked a real shift in stand-up comedy in the UK, at least. But yeah, it's kind of it's always been half-hour sitcoms for me. That's what really makes me laugh, and that's what I always wanted to write, and that's what it turns out I have some skills at writing.
Yes, you do.
At least I think so. Anyway, thank you.
And what do I find funny?
Yeah.
It's funny. It's to hear James talk. He talks a lot about writing and sitcoms. I love TV. I watch Key and Peele. I watch Rick and Morty. Those are kind of my sweet spots these days. But for me, because what I do is live performance, improvisation happens and then it's gone. I think I'm such a sucker for the spontaneous moment. So I have 4 young kids. Those are probably the things that make me laugh the most. Seeing them learn how to make jokes and be successful at it, not be successful at it, is super satisfying.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And there's a lot of material, I'm sure.
Oh, yeah. And then to see them trying to figure out. I mean, I'm an educator, and so a huge part of what we do at the theater is teaching people how to do comedy. So it's super satisfying for me to see people that I know didn't think comedy is something that they could do, but then we're able to grasp the kind of the concepts. It means comedy is a skill, like basketball is a skill, and seeing people do that, I think, is really satisfying.
Yeah. Well, that's actually going to lead us into our next question, Harrison. So what are the basics in teaching comedy? And like you said, if it's a skill, then can anyone be funny?
Yeah. Oh, I think so. Yeah. I think everybody can be funny. I think some people might have a longer road. And I think if you're 99 years old and you have a long road, you might not make it to the end. But I think the skill sets are learnable by everyone because they're so, at some level, intuitive. I mean, I think what you described is the idea of a benign violation, something that sticks out and surprises us. I mean, I think those are all things that we can do. So the skills that make you good at comedy are the skills of observation. So you have to be able to notice what is happening, what is the real, what do you see that everybody else sees, and then what can you see even deeper. I think it's one of the reasons why comedy and news are such a big deal today.
Yeah.
So a huge percentage of people watch The Daily Show or nightly late night shows because they're able to observe, and comedy is kind of inherently about critical thinking. And so be able to kind of recognize those patterns and then heighten those patterns. That's a lot of what we teach in our classes.
That's awesome.
Oh, claim to fame. I was just realizing a claim to fame. I wrote a radio show which vanished without trace called The Pits. And it starred, there's this British guy. He was a comedian. He's called John Oliver.
Yeah.
I don't know if you've heard
I've
of him.
heard of him. Yeah.
He kind of disappeared. I've not heard from him for ages.
he's a
I hope
big
he's
deal.
okay. I just worry for him because I hope he's found work.
I got good news for you, James. He's quite successful.
Yeah. No, I know. He's amazing.
Yeah, and if you think about what John Oliver's very good at, he's very good at recognizing, what are the patterns, and then what are the things that stick out and are unusual. I mean, I remember one time The Daily Show, when it was kind of at its height in the early 2000s under the Bush administration, they said what we do is we point out the absurd. So they're pointing out the kind of the thing that sticks out, the violation, and then the comedy makes it benign and digestible.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think that works. I mean, the technical explanations of it, I think, do work pretty well. And in the book, I sort of talk about incongruity and stuff.
That's
but
right.
I try not to spend too long on it because talking about the theory of comedy is one of the least funny things you can do. And books about, and people like Kierkegaard and stuff have written books about comedy, which are kind of the least funny books ever written. And, these guys understand comedy and then decide not to be funny. It's kind of incredible, really. But I think when you say, can anyone be funny? One thing I would add to what's already been said is I think you can be funny. Even if you're not funny, you can be funny if you know yourself, if you know who you are, if you know how you come across. And recently I've been doing a few workshops with people who preach, trying to explain to them what they can learn from stand-up comedians. And actually, one of the things they can learn from stand-up comedians is not how to tell jokes, because in fact, there's a chapter in my book which is entitled, the chapter heading is Why You Shouldn't Start Your Sermon with a Joke. Because for a variety of reasons that I could bore you with later or another time. But one of the things is, most people aren't natural joke tellers. And if they are, great, and you can get better at that. But actually, what the stand-up comedian knows immediately is when they come on stage, the audience are immediately finding a pigeonhole for this person. They're immediately going, oh, it's this guy or that guy. Once you're an established comedian, then obviously you know who you are and you know who people think you are. So you have that persona. But a stand-up comedian, what they choose to wear, how they walk on, the first thing they say, a comedian called Milton Jones, I mentioned it before, he's kind of got a bit of a wild-eyed look about him when he walks on. And he used to walk on with a strange jumper, and now he sort of wears Hawaiian-style shirts and stuff. And he worked out that if he just walked on like this with a bit of an expression, that kind of bought him an extra few seconds before people were just like, okay, so now what have you got? And so I think anyone who can own their own persona and therefore play along with that, I think would also go some way, rather than just finding the best script and reading it out the best that you can. Actually, comedy is about truth and authenticity quite often. But obviously the great showbiz Hollywood expression is, it's all about authenticity. If you can fake that, then you're made. But there is a lot of truth in that.
James, your new book is called The Sacred Art of Joking.
It is.
Part of what you look at, I think, is when jokes go wrong. What does that mean for a joke to go wrong? How do you prevent it? How do you recover from it?
One of the things that's of great interest to me is people being offended by jokes. And actually, quite often, they're offended by jokes that went right. And I think that's something that we could get into. But you sort of know when a joke's gone wrong is when you haven't given people all the right information. There was a British comedian called Jasper Carrott talking about people who can't tell jokes. It may have been a slightly misogynistic piece about why women can't tell jokes, but which it just isn't. It isn't true. But I do remember him just saying, and you get to the punchline, which is, what color have they given me then? Oh, and he was blind. I should have said that this character was blind. You know what I mean? And you go, okay, you should have started the joke with that. And so if you don't give people the right information, then the joke can't work. But it's interesting how we do know how jokes work. And I do actually mention in the book how, just going back to Harrison talking about his kids, it's so funny to see a kid tell a joke and it sounds like a joke, but it isn't one.
Yeah.
And you instinctively know what the problem with the joke is. So actually hearing kids tell jokes and getting them wrong, you just go, oh, so what you need now is a punchline that is surprising rather than just something that sounds like it has the rhythm of a joke or is like a question and an answer. You know, the answer needs to have two meanings or... So we instinctively know when a joke goes right and wrong, but obviously it's only geeks like me who actually kind of pick over the bones. And
the idea you mentioned of the content and the context is really important. So telling a joke to a kid is also really hard because they have such a limited context.
Yeah.
They only know 100
Yeah.
words. And so I think that's an interesting challenge that even kids face because they have such a limited scope of the world. I teach high school students improv as well. And it's hard for them to figure out.
And they only have 200 words, don't they?
They have about 200 words, right? Yeah, and it's because they like
And
you said,
three
they
of them
don't,
are,
right. They don't know themselves very well. They don't know the world very well, and so it's really hard for them to figure out how to do comedy, especially that's sustainable. I mean, so much of high school comedy is so short and so brief because it's difficult for them to sustain any kind of context or reality.
That's an excellent point. With anything with vocabulary, your context. I love that idea about comedy is about truth and being authentic, and you have to be able to give all that right information. And there is some brain science on humor. Laughing that is clear. If you have observed the positive effects of comedy, when Harrison, you just talked about with student performance and health and improving and relationship strengthening. So what have you seen in your experience, Harrison, that has shown us some of the positive effects of comedy and laughter?
One of my things I say a lot is I'm a sucker for live comedy and filmed drama because I think comedy is so communal. I mean, part of the idea of recognizing the thing that sticks out, the unusual thing, is that there's actually a noise for it. Like you hear people make the noise, and that helps you register that there is comedy. That's why so much of what I do is live comedy. I think comedy is so enjoyable live. The other people are recognizing it. That helps you clue in. That makes it funnier for you. I mean, even sitcoms, which are not live, are sometimes filmed in front of a live audience or even have a laugh track to kind of help cue that. So I see that in my community. There's, about 80 people here in Greenville who do improv, and it creates an automatic kind of close, tight-knit community. Going through an improv 101 class feels like going through a foxhole because you're going through it together, you're learning together. His laughter helps inform your scene and vice versa. And so I think it's automatically communal, and that's true in the improv and comedy world, kind of worldwide.
That's awesome. What about you, James? What do you think about the health benefits, as we talked about, of laughter and humor?
well, I mean, I'm perfectly prepared to believe there are some, but I think comedy is so fundamental to the universe. And because whether you're religious or not, you have a sense of how the world should be because we have an imagination, because we have some kind of moral code, but we have a sense of what we're striving for. And therefore we can tell when something's funny because it doesn't hit it. Or it gets there in the wrong way or something like that. And so I think it is in our soul. Comedy is inherently in our soul. But it's interesting. People who don't find things funny are weird. And actually, they're quite unnerving. People who are deadly serious, I think, we're often frightened of them because we just think this person's kind of not normal.
Because they're signaling that they don't feel safe, which makes you feel not safe.
Yeah, I don't know whether they just don't get it or something. Sometimes they're kind of pompous and they kind of want to exude seriousness and therefore they kind of trample on comedy. And that's a particular problem, I think, often in a religious, serious religious context.
Yeah.
But they can sometimes turn that into their advantage where people have that kind of vacant expression of like, everyone's laughing and I don't know why. Cool. And they sometimes know how to be funny without actually being funny or having a sense of humor, and that's fine. They kind of realize it and own it. But I think I'll happily buy health benefits. Maybe it's the best medicine, whatever. It kind of isn't. You probably need insulin if you're a diabetic rather than comedy. So it kind of, a joke will only get you so far. But I think it's so fundamental to us. And I think when the dehumanizing of a society goes on in whatever totalitarian or theocratic regime you go through in the world or in history, I mean, comedy is like the first thing to go. I mean, they get rid of that before they get rid of jazz. And jazz just makes people angry sometimes anyway. So I think it's always, I love jazz. I really like jazz, even slightly weird jazz. But I realize it's very hard to defend. And when the jackboots come, offer them up jazz. It's just like, they came for my jazz and I did not speak up.
James, don't you think there's also something kind of anti-authoritarian about comedy? I mean, there's something about it's funny to punch up, it's funny to attack those in power. Humor is like a very safe way to satirize and to attack. I mean, that's even, that's Shakespearean, right? And so I think, you want to limit the jokes to ensure that the truth is not seen.
Yeah, I mean, I'm okay with the general principle of punching up as a good rule of thumb. We hear it quite a lot. I think punching down can be funny in the right hands and done in the right way.
Only if you're British.
Well, maybe, yeah. I mean, if you watch Fawlty Towers and see the way that John Cleese, Basil Fawlty treats Manuel, and there are other similar examples, I'm sure, in other shows. But actually, often Manuel gets the last laugh, and the joke is always on the bully, isn't it?
Sure.
But again, that is part of the fabric of the universe. I would argue it's because we're image bearers of God, but we know in our heart of hearts that the proud will be humbled, and therefore a character who is proud is brought low. And a character who in the third minute of a sitcom tells a big lie, we know that lie is going to be exposed by the end of the episode. And if it isn't, that would be weird. We would find it very, very odd. So even in comedy that looks like it's kind of secular and meaningless, it really isn't. They've just done a really good job of covering it up. Even the original version of The Office, the British version of The Office, looks like it's very flat and with ennui, and it looks like it's kind of not really going anywhere. But that really isn't the case. There's a lot going on underneath. And if you took that away, you would just think, what is this? This is meaningless.
Excellent points.
Wow.
Yeah.
I had not really thought about that before. I thought about how comedy is a great way of introducing uncomfortable truths, but I hadn't thought of it in political terms and how it's the first to go. But I do remember growing up in a country that an authoritarian regime had just been overthrown about a year or two before we moved there. And one night on TV, it was a sort of Saturday Night Live type program, and they were making fun of the previous dictator and his wife. And somebody looked at me and said, 2 years ago, you never saw this on TV here. Even though it was it wasn't really that big a deal, but it was there.
Yeah, I read an article one time that was about how the Daily Show changed. Like the Daily Show, it was in its prime in the worst of the Bush years, right? Because George Bush is such a great foil for comedy. He's so confident, and so it played this really important role of truth telling during the Iraq War and all these things. But then once Obama won, the Daily Show kind of lost its mission. By 2012, and Obama was reelected, and so having Jon Stewart leave and Trevor Noah come in and kind of be a new era almost of what does a Trump world Daily Show look like really is interesting, and even the idea of like the current president of Ukraine is a formal actor and comedian, right? And use those skill sets to bring in reforms into this country is a kind of a fascinating concept.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
So what's an essential element about telling comedic stories we need to understand, or we need to know to understand the role that laughter plays in our lives, Harrison?
I think the context is huge. So you got to understand the reality, which is why I think comedians are so good at understanding what's going on. And James mentioned they have to be self-aware of themselves and their own perspective and how they're perceived, everything down from the way their voice sounds and what they're wearing and what they look like, and also understand the room and be able to feel a room, because rooms all feel differently, especially in a live show. And then once they kind of have a grasp on that context, one thing we describe in our classes is that scenes, improv scenes or scenes in a sitcom, there's like this 99% real aspect to it, almost 99.9%. All the things are acting normal. Mugs are mugs and people have hair and everyone's talking the way they normally talk. But there's just one tiny thing that's off. And so what comedians are doing is just highlighting that small little thing. So much of a comedian is understanding the real, understanding the context, and then be able to highlight that one little small thing.
James, what do you think?
Yeah, can you just repeat the question?
Sure. What's the essential element we need to understand the role that comedy plays in our lives?
Well, I don't really know. I mean, I think we all relate to comedy in different ways, but I think it is so ingrained in us. It is so part of our lives that it's kind of inseparable, really. I think the moment you take a step back, I mean, it is sad that, kids laugh a lot and adults don't, and adults kind of spend most of our time getting cross or bored, and kids really know what life's about. So yeah, but I think, yeah, I don't know. I feel like I've reached a cul-de-sac on that one.
Well,
Sorry
you
about
mentioned
that.
a little bit earlier in your answers when you were talking about it's fundamental to our soul. I mean, I almost wonder if that's not part of that essential element, that it is so ingrained in us. And I think I really appreciate that.
I think a huge part of comedy is that it has to be benign, and so you have to feel like it's safe. I mean, stand-up comics, even edgy stand-up comics.
Oh, I don't know that I agree.
You don't know if you agree with that?
No, because I think comedy is, I think this is why we've got big problems with comedy, is that comedy doesn't have to be safe. So Louis C.K. is not safe. I mean, we know he's not safe, but Family Guy is not safe because you wince, but it's still funny.
It doesn't have to be completely safe, but you have to. I mean, even laughing is a vulnerable thing to do. I mean, your eyes are literally closed and you're opening yourself up, right? It's a very open experience. When someone goes to a comedy show, crosses their arms, right? I mean, they are closed off. So comedy is such an open, almost inherently liberal, not in the political way, but open experience. Yeah, I agree. It's the openness that makes you vulnerable and willing to get cut, right? By comedy. Poked by comedy. Yeah. But I think the openness is so essential. And that's, I think, what the people who are not laughing are either not noticing all the things that need to be noticed, or they're closed off and not willing to be vulnerable. Because again, comedy is such a vulnerable thing. The root of noticing things that are unusual in a communal experience. I mean, I don't know where it comes from, but the idea of hunting as a tribe and you see something orange in the bushes and everyone gasps, what could it be? It's a tiger. And you walk over and you realize it's just a clump of hair, and you laugh, and everyone goes, "Oh, it's safe," right? So there's this feeling of safety and community, I think, that is needed to feel. I mean, we say this a lot in our live shows. Your goal as the host, the intro, is to make people feel comfortable because they're about to go through something that's not comfortable. I mean, comedy, you're right, is not comfortable, but comfortability is essential, I think, for the context of it.
Yeah. No, I get that. And I have a friend, is a comedian called Paul Carenza, who does a lot of stand-up gigs in churches. And he spends the first 5 or 10 minutes telling the audience, we're going to have fun and it's going to be okay. You know what I mean? And you can laugh and Jesus won't be angry with you.
That's right. That's right. He has to convince them that he's one of them, right? I'm one of you guys. Yeah. I'm not here. Yeah.
Yeah. And that's why I always think there are so many things that can go wrong with a joke because of that context of the gig, the context of the actor, the context of the mise en scène, I believe is a way of putting it. There are so many elements. And then there's the context of the times that you're in, and a joke that was funny now, it was not funny 2 months ago, or is very much not funny in 2 months' time after something's happened that we don't know about.
That's the hard part about writing comedy. You're writing, if you're writing a sitcom, you're writing it now, right? And things change. I mean, think about classic sitcoms. You go back and you watch scenes and you're like, ooh, that just doesn't land the same.
Absolutely. Things have different connotations. But because of all that, there are so many things that could go wrong. I always think it's kind of a miracle that jokes work at all. There's like 15 different elements, between 15 and 1,000. And you only need a few of them to misfire. And it's like, oh, okay, that didn't work. Or even, oh dear, I can't be friends with you anymore. Or, oh, I'm calling the police now, which we have in the UK because we have ludicrous and insane laws on what can and can't be said, which are very, very badly written. And so they're essentially totalitarian. But that's another discussion to have.
Sounds like more fodder for a comedy series.
Well, yeah, maybe, but maybe you just write it and get arrested. I don't know, really. I mean, you guys in the States, you guys have proper freedom of speech laws. It's enshrined, which I think is brilliant. And over here, we've just got these. Well, we used to have blasphemy laws, which were abolished, and now they could nail pretty much anyone for anything if they really wanted to, based on various acts of parliament that were brought in to prevent people being radicalized over the internet, for example. And then when a guy makes an offensive video and puts it up on YouTube, a year later, the police just go, oh, we should arrest that guy. And then they just go and arrest him. And he's been found guilty and been fined £700. And you go, well, what you've just done was not why the law was written, but the law is there. So, and the fact that they can do that is just, I think.
Maybe we should edit this portion of the podcast out then for UK delivery.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. I think we're safe. We're just talking around it, everyone.
There you go. There you go.
If you're listening, MI6, it's fine.
But again, like that context of the joke that I just made wouldn't make sense without your explanation. you set this
Yeah.
context. Now, this is high stakes.
Yeah.
You know, if James says something wrong, he could be arrested. And
Absolutely.
yeah, right.
Yeah.
No, that's brilliant. That's brilliant.
So comedy is fundamentally about truth and authenticity. Thank you, James, Cary, and Harrison Brookie. To everyone listening in, join us next week as we continue a hilarious conversation with these two guys.